1987, a historic agreement between the Soviet Union and the United States. President Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan signed the INF Treaty, marking a change of course after decades of Cold War nuclear tension. The root of the tension was this: the Soviet SS-20 missile, a nuclear warhead that could strike Western Europe at short notice. That worried those European countries on the other side of the Iron Curtain, who were well within the missile's reach of 5,500 kilometers. The U.S. response was to deploy its own mid-range Pershing missiles in Europe. That was met with protests across the West. The demonstrations showed demand for a new direction. The result was the INF Treaty. It banned all ground-launched ballistic missiles with ranges of between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. The Soviet Union got rid of 1,846 intermediate-range missiles, and the United States about half as many. By 1991, a total of 2,692 missiles were destroyed. Now, President Donald Trump has officially withdrawn the U.S. from the treaty. Washington and its NATO allies say Russia has deployed new intermediate ground missiles that violate the INF's terms. Moscow, for its part, has also pulled out of the treaty, charging that Washington has breached the INF by setting up missile defense stations in Eastern Europe. Analysts worry a new Cold War-style arms race could be looming.
Well, for more, let's bring in our correspondent in Brussels, Terry Schultz. Terry, why have the United States and Russia not succeeded in keeping this treaty alive?
Well, Terry, it's not today that the U.S. would say the treaty is dead. It would allege that Moscow violated the INF years ago when it started building this missile system, and that basically it's not a treaty if only one side adheres to it. And it took the U.S. a few years to convince the Europeans, its NATO allies, that this is indeed the case and that it's more dangerous to continue to follow an accord that isn't working. And now all of NATO unanimously supports the United States pulling out of the treaty. Russia has been given many warnings until the very last minute, and now while some European leaders don't like that the INF is dead, they understand it.
Now, many see the termination of this treaty as a threat to global peace. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had this to say yesterday.
The Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF, is a landmark agreement that helps stabilize Europe and end the Cold War. When it expires tomorrow, the world will lose an invaluable break on nuclear war, and this will likely heighten, not reduce, the threat posed by ballistic missiles.
Terry, is the UN Secretary General right to be worried? Are we facing new threats, possibly a new arms race?
He is right to be worried, and he's certainly not alone. With no restraints now on intermediate-range nuclear missiles, there's no telling what Russia will do, and the United States is very likely to come up with a new system to match or best the Russian missile. That said, the United States has said that its aim is to create a new framework to control nuclear weapons development that would also include China, which has been far and, unconstrained by any treaty and really working hard on this. So while nobody is really happy to see the treaty go, everyone acknowledges that this really wasn't working anymore.
Now, this is an old treaty. The INF Treaty was signed in the 1980s between the U.S. and the former Soviet Union. Can it not be argued that this treaty was actually obsolete, especially given the rise of other powers like China and the development of new weapon systems?
That is something the United States has argued, and others as well. But I think the question here was not whether it needed to be updated, and certainly not whether Russia needed to come into compliance with the existing treaty, but whether it would be better to kill it as you work on creating this new accord, this new hoped-for accord. And I think that's where the Europeans were uncomfortable with declaring the INF defunct. But now that's the deal. That's today. As Secretary General of NATO Jens Stoltenberg says, they simply have to adjust to living in a